what we now recognize as, our modern day metropolises, right? Especially in the Northeast, from DC, Philadelphia, New York, the Midwest, Chicago, even Detroit, and most certainly New York. Third of all, migration. Although, yes, it's immigration too, I'm talking about migration. In fact, there is such a huge wave of African Americans leaving the South after Reconstruction that there's a name for it. It's called the Great Migration. African Americans leaving the South by the thousands because of the Jim Crow laws that were instituted after Reconstruction that just continue segregation for another 100 years. And while you might think, oh, well, slavery's illegal now, yay! The violence only escalates in the South, where until the Civil Rights Movement of the 1960s, and especially in the Civil Rights Movement of the 1960s, it was a violent affair to deal with racial issues in the South. Migration, and then devastation. And what am I talking about with devastation? The 2 world wars, right?
Yeah, 2 world wars.
We talked about, how the Civil War was on this continent, in close range, and brother against brother. And now we're dealing with modern warfare. Now we have an Air Force. Now we have bombs. Now there are submarines in combat against each other. So, that level of warfare that has not yet been seen, and on a massive scale, for these 2 world wars to have happened. I mean, imagine, modern world war, the first time, what that must have been like. And, the attitudes and loss of life, and especially going into the Great Depression, just what a time for change in this country. And we talked about how, the United States, what brings us out of the Depression is World War II. And it also makes the United States the youngest superpower in the history of the world. So it is something to say about, this country and the values we've talked about as far as what's American and what makes American literature that brings us to that point. Okay? All right. So we've got these 4 things. Any questions about these as far as, the elements of these historically? Okay. What results from these things? And you can see how these things go together, right? Of course, like industrialization is going to lead to urbanization because the big capitals of industry are the urban areas. And of course, when people migrate, where are they going to go? To the urban areas. Why? To get jobs. Exactly. Industrialization. And the devastation of the 2 world wars, of course, aggregates, and this is what contributes to, the United States as an emergent superpower, industrialization, which, again, affects these 2 factors. Do you see how all of these things overlap? And it's really difficult to pinpoint, what happens more or when. Anyway, the result and the impact on literature is this. Feelings of mechanization. The assembly line manufacturer, the assembly line factory becomes almost a metaphor for, the conformity that many artists warned is coming for citizens of the United States. This sort of down, down, movement, up, across, down, up, across, down. It becomes a metaphor for, is this what our lives are going to become? You know, if we have all of these things that are mass manufactured and made together, you know, it becomes a metaphor for, you know, us as a mass manufactured society. That, you know, hey, this country was built on rugged individualism. What is happening? And it's the same sort of metaphor, and you hear people still talk about this today. What about hand craftsmanship? You know, what happens to the artisan? What happens to the guildsman? What happens to the people who have these skills and talents when a machine can replace you? And, you know, writers and artists in every genre use this metaphor as a warning for the conformity they see coming. And ever been at a party and felt completely alone? Yeah. That's the idea behind this urbanization, the isolation of urbanization. It reminds me of that movie, that Tom Cruise movie. Minority Report. And you get this side view of a building. And what is terrifying about this side view, it's not the future, it's now. You get the side view of this building, and what it is shoeboxes stacked on, and you see people doing their little things, you know, their little shoebox lives, sitting in papers, having coffee, reading papers, watching TV, you know, taking a bath, having sex, doing their little shoebox thing. And it's this, you know, it's a side view of, although there are maybe thousands of people in that building, they're all alone and isolated in their little shoebox. And what you see is the spiders like crawl up and ID people, you know, through that maze of going into the shoeboxes. Do you know what I'm saying? And that really, to me, highlighted the sense of isolation within the urban environment. Then, migration also leads to this sense of isolation, sometimes in the urban areas, but for the Harlem Renaissance, it will mean something very different. And I'll talk about that in a second. Now, the devastation of the 2 world wars, there's just no other way to put that, right? The sense of that if these things can happen, what's next for humanity? A sense of stagnation and numbness. Because it's the idea that after so much horror, ultimately, you know, one becomes numb to you know, what is horrible. And what happens to a society that becomes numb to horror? Do you know what I'm saying? And this is the big fear during modernism. Now, tell me what we read that reflects these characteristics of modernism. You know, a feeling of futility, like pointlessness. If we can all kill each other with, you know, the drop of a bomb or the push of a button, then what is the point in life, right? Existentialism. And when people throw that big word at you, all it is questioning the point of existence. That's all existentialism is.
The alphabet key?
Well, what we read the latter part of the term.
Oh, okay.
So if there is like a point of, oh, I'm having an existential crisis, you can say, oh man, you've got a reason to live. Now you know what that means, right? So these feelings of, you know, what's the point in living, and we've lost that rural sense of community, you know, what this country is built on. What have we read so far